Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson here on February 23rd. A quick podcast for you today, but we caught up with the remaining coaches at Nebraska, Rob Dvoracek and Donovan Raiola spoke yesterday. Corey Campbell, the head strength coach, spoke yesterday. So we wanted to dive into some of that here to round out the week. Where do we want to start? Actually, I'm not even going to leave it up to you. I'm just going to make decisions. Brian Christopherson, what were your, we'll start with Corey Campbell. He was the first one that spoke. What were your thoughts on Nebraska's strength coach?
I thought he presented himself well. I mean, it was kind of interesting hearing his background with Matt Rule. Like they both shared the same strength coach at one point. John Thomas is the coach's name, who coached Campbell at Georgia and also Rule at Penn State. And it was just one of those links where I think that was like the connecting point. And then you realize you sort of have all these ideals you share. You know, you're both former walk-ons, and you kind of have to, if you come up through that route, you kind of have to have the same sort of mentality to try to have success. And I think they kind of bonded over that and just sort of the way they want to operate. So I think a person listening in, at least first impression, would say they have to like how the visions of the head coach and strength coach are aligned and how together they seem. Like, he said that Rule's constantly in communication with him about like new concepts, like, hey, not to get in his way, but hey, should we try this? Have you seen this? And things of that nature. So I thought some of that inside stuff was interesting. And, he's a guy who, I think he got people's attention too by showing up right when Rule did. Campbell didn't just get here like in late December, early January. He was there at the initial press conference, and he said he wanted to set the tone that strength and conditioning is a big deal around here, and this is sort of how we want to operate and try to get that implemented as fast as he can. So. Also, just how much he was involved in like the planning of the new facility and the setup there, as we I don't know if they're going to give tours or whatever, but he had a big say when he was here in December and like how that's going to look. And so, I mean, one of the most important guys in the whole operation is Corey Campbell. There's no doubt about it.
I was actually, you mentioned that, Brian, about his say and what the new thing is going to look like. I was kind of surprised that I hadn't really ever considered that before. Does that make sense? Like, different strength coaches are going to want things to work a different way. They're going to want things to be set up a different way. They might even want the space to look a different way. But in my brain, where exercise is, a thing that happens maybe once or twice a week, maybe, you don't really think about the setup of the weight room and the value of having everything kind of put up just how you want it. So if you're doing station to station to station or anything else, it definitely seems like there's a lot of thought process that goes into it, but not when you're like me and you really try to avoid thinking about exercise. And that's how you get to look like this.
And it's not just where the barbells are set up and stuff. It's
it's the layout of the whole thing is what I took.
A lot. You're starting to pick up a lot from this staff about recovery. And not that that's not part of every strength and conditioning operation, but I think it's an extreme focus of this staff. Availability is the best ability is the old quote, and Rule uses it too. And it's that idea that they really had to work on that because, I mean, they were all in Carolina, and you think about the NFL and what a grind it is to like get guys ready for the next Sunday, after going to battle. And then it's like Tuesday, Wednesday that you guys follow your own teams and that there's like, is this guy going to play? And you got to kind of work through it throughout the week. So he spoke about how that experience can be pretty useful in the recovery process, having been through the NFL where guys are getting a little older and the wear and tear, and you got to figure out a way to, how are they present for the next game, in addition to building up strength. And he also had a quote to inspire us. He said, "I'm a firm believer that there is no substitute for strength and no excuse for the lack of it." So I'm going to put that up in the morning when I get up at 5 a.m. for my triangle push-ups.
Yes, I like that. Bruntz, are you at all surprised? I mean, another thing that kind of stood out to me is that Corey Campbell was up there talking to the media in like a press conference setting. I mean, I don't remember seeing this under previous strength coaches. I mean, some of them more notorious than others for just avoiding any kind of media coverage or talking about what they were doing at all. What do you make about that, Bruntz? That Corey Campbell was out front and center, and to me, it seems like this is a guy that's probably going to be available if you want to have that conversation.
Yeah, no, it's noteworthy. I think. I mean, I'm trying to think in the past. It's always been a job that's kind of like hidden away in the shadows.
Yeah,
you don't have time to talk to media because you're too busy with the pounding of weights and kind of the Rocky IV outpost kind of situation. But yeah, I mean, I think I think more of a reflection too of Matt Rule. I mean, I think he's completely comfortable with putting the people that he's hired in front of the media. I think he trusts them. I think, you know, I think too with strength and conditioning, I think it's important to hear from those coaches. I mean, those are the coaches that are around the players more than anybody over the course of a year. They're the ones that are responsible for taking what the head coach wants and like putting it into practice in the dark months of January and February when, you're getting the bulk of your work done. So it's nice. I mean, hearing the intention behind things, I think is important when, maybe you get into September and October and you have a rash of injuries or, guys are performing differently than they had before, why. And it's not, one of these kind of like, whispered things. Oh, they're doing more Olympic style lifts or, they're not maxing out as much as they had before, those kinds of things. So it's a nice change. I mean, I mean, there's a reason that your strength coach makes a ton of money. It's because they're kind of like that connector for so many pieces of your program and making sure that it gets going in the right direction.
He also, real quick, he also stressed that, the workouts, as you would hope, it's not about being a professional weightlifter here. It's about tailoring it toward what specific assistant coaches value, in their players as far as what can help them have maximize their skill at that particular position. And I would think that's how it goes most places. As he said, most operations around the country are sort of doing the same thing. It's about who's willing to sort of put in the extra because everybody's kind of has a playbook that is pretty similar. You're not like usually coming up with ideas that haven't been thought of before for the most part. But that's interesting too, is just the connection. He talked on a previous podcast about this too, that he has with each of the position coaches and sort of what do you want? Like, you got to have that plan for different groups and it's going to vary. And so, I think he's at an advantage because he knows those coaches well, most of them. He does have to get to know a couple of them, like Tony White is new to him. But most of those guys he's been around. And so you kind of already have an idea of what they want out of their athletes and how they operate.
No doubt about it. One of those coaches he's going to have those conversations with and learn a little bit more about is Donovan Raiola, who stood up and spoke about the offensive line for the first time since last spring. I don't even think we got him in fall camp last year. So it was noteworthy for a variety of reasons. But Donovan Raiola up there talking about his offensive line, talking about where guys like Ben Scott potentially slot in and, what Nori Newelli was up to. It was an informative conversation with Donovan Raiola. BC, what would you say was the biggest thing you took away from Nebraska's offensive line coach? And I'm just going to remove sort of the Rule relationship element because that was a big part of it. He's the one holdover, but more so the nuts and bolts in the offensive line conversation. What was your biggest takeaway from Donovan Raiola?
I mean, publicly, he wouldn't commit to Scott at center. I guess you got to note that, but that's what it's going to be. I mean, so I mean, I'm just saying what he said. That's what he said, right? He wouldn't. He didn't want to officially
Sure.
off, and that I think that's just for competition, and all that. But it sure feels like that would be what it is. I thought what he said about Prohaska was kind of interesting. Just as it's really tough when you're a guy who's had back-to-back injuries that are so serious in nature to keep your head up. And it sounds like Teddy's really excelled at that for what his situation is, and has been involved in all the meetings and everything like that. And I wrote a little thing about Teddy last night. I mean, Teddy to me is like, still, we do that most indispensable Huskers list. He's going to be up there again for me because, I mean, you look at the tackle situation, especially, after the one they thought they went to Oklahoma, and, they've had Kevin Williams leave and Hunter Anthony leave. And I'm not saying those guys were necessarily playing a lot, but there's only like 3 or 4 guys you really can name there at the 2 tackle spots that we know for sure. And so if Teddy can get right and just lock down a spot for a full year, that changes the whole equation of the offensive line and, frankly, the offense as a whole. If he can't and there's a struggle there, that's a big, big question mark. So anything I hear about Teddy is interesting to me.
Yeah, and we're pointing out that this is his 3rd spring, but he's only been able to participate as a freshman. He's missed the last 2 springs. He's missed a lot of game time. I think that Teddy Prohaska is really interesting, but I do think that all of this time missed, like it's hard to just come back from that and step in right away and be a competent, good left tackle. Like that might be right there why Walter Nolan was looked so hard at as a left tackle for Nebraska, because Teddy Prohaska just doesn't have as much experience and doesn't have that time to really learn at practice either, because he's just been unfortunately hurt the last couple of years. Bruntz, anything you want to add on Donovan Raiola?
No, I think BC hit on it well. I mean, I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit at the Scott thing. Like, I think we know where that's going. I mean, it's an interesting room. I mean, you have pretty much the same cast of characters minus, you're adding Scott to it.
No Hickson, but you get Scott, and then you'll have Nori Newelly back.
Yeah. I mean, Newelly's a big piece there. And it's, I do wonder if there's value in having the same voice 2 years in a row. I mean, that's a group that has, you had a rotating cast of characters, an offensive coordinator, and different approaches there. Maybe there's a benefit there to having Raiola for another year and having Matt Rule heavily involved in the offensive line. I think he's going to be. So that to me, it is at least a positive when you have so much in flux in the program right now with new coaches and new approaches to things.
Absolutely. All right, let's jump over to Rob Dvoracek, the last coach that we had not met yet. We had not talked to. Any takeaways? We'll start with Bruntz this time from Rob Dvoracek. What you learned from Nebraska's linebackers coach and the chaos that he hopes to bring.
Yeah, it's I thought his description of Tony White's defense was pretty good. I think everybody's this spring is going to be trying to wrap their arms a little bit around kind of what that means, what a 3-3-5 means, what it's actually going to look like. I don't know that it's an easy defense to kind of put into a box for what they're going to do. I am eager to see with Dvoracek's group who ends up where. I mean, because I think that position more than a lot of them, you've got to figure out who can help you on the edge, who could go up and be a 4th down lineman if they need it, who can cover in space the way that they need it to. I mean, is there a rover in that group? They have 2 returning starters in Henrich, who's not going to be going through spring, and Luke Reimer. But beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of guys that were well thought of as recruits that really haven't been counted on at all to this point. So there's a lot of evaluation work, I think, for Rob Dvoracek to do this spring to figure out what the heck he has over there. Plus, the additions that they made out of the transfer portal too.
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and so we'll play this game right now. With Nick Henrich out for the spring, who is Nebraska's second best linebacker behind Luke Reimer? I don't have an answer for you because obviously Ernest Hausman is gone. You don't have Garrett Nelson or O'Shawn Mathis anymore. We haven't seen a lot from Mekhi Bear or Randolph Gapai or Seth Malcolm. Is Garrett Snodgrass still in the mix there, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, he's in the mix. I mean, I think you're honestly hoping the answer is one of those new guys. Be it a Sherman, be it a Chief Borders. I've heard good things about Chief Borders, like how he's adapted and stuff like that. And you're talking about two guys who come from the SEC ranks where they know what work's supposed to look like and all that. So that I don't think they're probably phased by the Corey Campbell workouts and stuff like that. That's sort of what you're ideally both those guys hit, and that immediately changes your depth perception of that room. I didn't know exactly where those guys were going to be labeled too when they arrived, like what they were, but they are listed at linebackers right now. And obviously the puzzle pieces can change throughout the spring. Kapai still interests me. Randolph.
He needs to spend a lot of time with Corey Campbell and whoever is feeding the players. Every time I see him, I'm like, hey, you're the same skinny kid that was visiting 4 years ago.
Yeah, he's got to have a good off season with that. But I mean, just like I think about him as a recruit, he's one of those guys when he came out, you're just like, man, his skill set's really intriguing. But you do have to put the weight on there and be big ready. But yeah, I think those new guys is who I look at for Sherman and Borders and like, what do you got? And when they show the little workout pictures and tease you with videos and stuff, I think those guys are in the jerseys that are valued, that show they're thought well of and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe that'll pop.
Is linebacker quietly a concern for either of you guys?
Yeah, quietly.
It's not the biggest thing, but it definitely stands out to me when you kind of look at the roster.
It's I'm perpetually concerned about defensive line. It keeps me up at night. I struggle to sleep sometimes because of the picture there. Linebackers probably right behind there in line for my level of concern. Defensive back,
what about the offensive line?
I would, in my order of concern, I would say defensive line keeps me up at night. Offensive line, I think about while I'm sitting at a stoplight. Or just, how it's going. Can that group take the next step? And I'd say linebackers probably right after that.
Where are you at when you're thinking about linebackers?
Probably the grocery store.
Okay.
Just picking up my produce, wondering who that second best linebacker is and if they got a guy that can get after the quarterback.
What produce would make the best linebacker? Go. It's not a real question. You don't have to answer this.
Kale. It's tough. It's gritty.
Yeah.
And you don't like it. Kale.
Okay. Well, there you go. That's what Bruntz thinks about when he's shopping for kale, linebacker play.
Yep.
I like that. Do you have any other places that you think about football?
No, just randomly. Just those three places.
Okay. Interesting. Let's finish up here with a little basketball. Like I said, it's going to be a short podcast. Little basketball here. BC, how you feeling for Saturday? What have you learned?
I feel like Nebraska's now a favorite in a game. The last few weeks in these games they've won, they've been the underdog, so they got to play with a little bit of the target on their back this Saturday. So that's a little bit of a different deal. I said in the previous podcast, I'm a little worried about this one, just because, it's sort of that psychology aspect of sports where everybody's kind of patting you on the back. And sometimes it's not said within a the locker room, I'm sure, but it's sort of this perception that builds like, well, the Minnesota game can be a win, and then what can you get done after that? So you have to avoid all that. You have to kind of get your mind off of like, that's the idea, and remember, this team has to scrap every time on the floor, and each guy has to do their niche role really well for it to be successful, because there's not a lot of margin for error. And I think if you just keep taking the floor with that idea in mind, like thin margin for error, somebody new's got to sort of be the wild card every game too, to go along with the Tominaga show. And then they'll be fine, I think, if that happens. But I'm a little bit worried about this game. I definitely am not going there thinking it's in the bag by any means.
Thinking about it when you're looking at fruit at the grocery store?
I haven't thought about it at the grocery store, but maybe tomorrow that'll kick in.
All right. Real quick here.
We are talking about basketball, though. I mean, we are legitimately like, this is a second podcast in a row we're talking hoops, and let's be honest,
they've earned it.
Yeah, they have earned it. And probably a couple weeks ago, we didn't suspect we would be sitting here thinking like, well, maybe they can get in the postseason. And I started thinking today, I have not normally gone to Iowa City to watch that game, and they play Iowa to finish the regular season. I was thinking like, I might have to try. Yeah.
Have you started doing the who has to win and who has to lose for Nebraska to get an NIT berth? Are we to that point yet?
No.
We're not.
Nebraska still has to. I think they have to get to 16 wins before you can really think about that. So that would mean they gotta beat Minnesota, then they gotta take care of Michigan State or Iowa. So once they're there, but other people seem to think that if they can just get to 500, they're golden for the NIT. So
you're not like breaking down MEAC schedules and stuff like that?
Honestly, guys, the hardest thing right now is to figure out how the hell Nebraska's not going to play on Wednesday night in the Big Ten tournament, because this conference just keeps beating each other. Nebraska needed some results to go the other way this week, but Wisconsin took care of Iowa. I forget who Michigan State beat Indiana. So these teams that you're kind of hoping to jump in the conference keep winning. And we're looking at a 8-car pileup at 10-10 if Nebraska is able to get there. So they may not be able to work their way off of that Wednesday night special that we've come to know and love with Big Ten conference tournament.
But if you're getting to having to get to a win number, that's maybe okay, isn't it? Like, yeah,
if you go 10 and if you're 10-10, which means they win out, they'd be 17-14 going into that game. If you were to win there, then you're 18-14. Plus, you set up a matchup that if you somehow win that, all of a sudden you've got another quad one win, and then you're at 19-14. The bracket is incredibly soft this year. Then you kind of talk about how far are they from the first four out picture here? So if you really wanted to dive into scenarios, that would be the route that Nebraska probably needs if they're going to somehow get into the NCAA tournament without winning the conference tournament.
As it stands right now, you have Indiana and Maryland at 10-7 in conference play. Illinois, Rutgers, Michigan State, and Michigan all 9-7. Iowa's 9-8, and Wisconsin is 8-9. And it's funny, like Nebraska's on like this huge heater and just have not moved whatsoever in the conference standings.
It is a tough conference when they all basically play to an average level. I know that doesn't make any sense, but it's just kind of what it is. They can all beat each other and they can all lose to each other at this point.
So what do you need to see? Let's forget the NIT. Let's have real fun. What would you need to see where you start to if someone starts to say, hey, let's have that other conversation about the big tournament. Before you send them to the other side of the room and don't talk to me, what do you have to see before we're at that point?
I think Nebraska has to go 2-0 against Minnesota in that scenario. So they got to win on Saturday. Then they'd have to win again in the Big Ten tournament because they'd be the 10 playing the 14, I'm pretty sure. Or no, the 11.
Out, right? To
yeah.
win regular season.
Yep. And then they got to win that first game. And then I think that puts you in a matchup where you're getting Purdue right off the bat in that tournament. And I think you got to win that game.
And
you
then
go beat Purdue, you're 19-14, and then you're playing in the semifinals, conference semifinals.
Well,
if you win that, you might as well just win the whole thing.
No, they would play.
They play the 4 or the 5.
They play the 6, like this. Yeah, it depends. They could play like the 6 seed or somebody that. So then they'd play Purdue, and you're talking about this quarterfinal game if they win 2. And
yeah,
okay.
Well, if they beat Minnesota, like if it's 11 and 14, wouldn't that put them in a matchup then with Purdue? No, you get a double bye. That's right.
With a 6 seed.
Yeah, I forget the double bye.
You'd be looking at like
I don't know why I forget.
You'd be probably like that 9 and 7, somewhere in there. You'd be looking at like Rutgers or.
I don't know if that's enough though, because then you're 19-14 and having to play like a Purdue or a Northwestern. Which, if somehow Northwestern's a 2 seed and Nebraska's coming through the bottom of the draw, that seems like a more manageable upset. I don't know why we're talking about this. As if they're going to get out of it.
Fun. That's why. Because it's
Brian. I'm not even convinced they're going to win on Saturday. I just have this horrible feeling that like expectations in Nebraska basketball don't go well together. Like this is a team that they barely beat in overtime when they had all of their starters, I believe, at up in the barn up in Minneapolis. I mean, I don't know. It's one of those things I need to go and see them do it. And quite frankly, if they can play like they did against Rutgers and just put an opponent away, that would make me feel a lot better too, because then you can rest up a little bit. You don't have to play Tominaga 38 minutes out of 40 and save them, because that Tuesday 8:00 game then becomes huge. You're just kicking the can down the road. Every game they win, the subsequent one is even bigger than the one that came before it.
And Michigan State's tricky. I mean, obviously they've been through stuff way tougher than basketball. And so, there's a lot going on there. But they played great last night or the other night. And
they smoked Indiana.
And this is now when you start to, how that program is. This is like the time when they kick it in.
This is when every announcer can't help but tell you that March is where Tom Izzo builds his teams.
Yeah.
He got a lot of mileage out of like one team that was underseeded that made it to like the Elite 8. And otherwise it's like he's taking 1s and 2s to the Final Four, and people act like Michigan State's a perpetual 8 seed that makes a run every year. Yeah, I'm calling them out a little bit.
I have to look at it. They do sometimes feel like they pull something out when you're like, I couldn't have seen that coming. But if you look at them just as a roster, when Nebraska played them the first time in East Lansing, they had enough deficiencies that I thought Nebraska left a little bit out there in that game. And frankly, it was an opportunity missed. So, I mean, there's that part of you which says, yeah, you can get them roster wise, but they're playing for a lot. They've been a little bit on the bubble themselves. So that's going to be a tough game.
No doubt about it. I pulled up their previous history. We can go through this next Tuesday on the podcast. Yeah. We'll just make it a hype cast version if we need to.
Depending how Saturday goes, yeah.
Exactly. All right. We went longer than I planned. This happens every time I say we're going to do a short podcast. We'll finish very quickly with this. Does Keisei Tominaga get 20 points, and does Nebraska win? Give me a yes or a no on each of those, starting with Bruntz.
An emphatic yes on both.
All right. BC?
Yes on the Husker win. I'll say no on the 20, but he'll have a good game. I'll say like 17 points.
Yeah, I think he comes up just short. He has like 18 points. Nebraska wins. So a no and a yes for me. I think the last time we all predicted Nebraska to win a game, they went and lost by 28 to Illinois. So if you're looking for somebody to blame on Saturday night when this doesn't work out well, come to Husker247.com and yell at the three of us. We'd be more than happy to engage with you on a Saturday night, because that's what happens at Husker 24/7. Be sure to check out the website. Plenty of stuff on the site. We have some pretty interesting content coming next week. We'll dive into more of that during the podcast. next week, but there'll be some unique stuff that you're not going to find anywhere else. So be sure to stop by Husker247 to see all of that. For Michael Bruntz and Brian Christopherson, I'm Mike Schaefer. We'll catch you next time.